Hey everybody, I am John Barker, and in this episode of Here to Record Show and Tell, we're taking a look at this neat little 4-input switcher from AVMATRIX. It's the HVS0402U. So let's take a deep dive. In the interest of full disclosure, AVMATRIX has sent this over to the channel to take a look at and make some videos about. This all-in-one device is made for bringing in multiple HDMI sources, like cameras or slideshow, and then mixing them together. And then you can send that out via HDMI to record, or to connect to a capture card, or you can use the USB output to capture to your computer, or to use something like OBS to stream it to YouTube and Facebook. The case itself is pretty sturdy, has a nice weight to it, and there's some rubber feet on the bottom so it sits on your desk and won't go anywhere. The buttons are all placed on the top here, and the inputs and outputs are spread around the device. The buttons on the top have quite a resistance to them, so you do have to press them down with some force to cut between the cameras or to preview your shots. If you've grown used to something like the A10 Mini or perhaps the Stream Deck, you will find that these take a little bit more of a push to get them to register your press. On the side you see there's a headphone output and the possibility of adding a USB drive in order to load graphics onto the device. On the back we have 2 mic inputs, 4 HDMI inputs which all have scalers and are able to accept signals from SD up to 1080p 60. Then 2 HDMI outputs which can be configured to be program, clean program, and even multiview. Next to that you have USB for capturing your program to a computer or streaming via OBS, etc. Then LAN for control via a PC application, tally via GPIO, and power. And on the bottom is a standard mounting point, so you could attach this to a tripod or something like that. So how does it work? Well, I'm connecting up a few HDMI sources here as well as a HDMI output so I can take a look at the configuration options. Once I attach the locking power cable, turn it on, you can see there's a nice little flashing animation of buttons to start up the device. And now that it's switched on, let's take a closer look at these buttons on the top. We have program and preview rows for simple cutting, and we also have a nice little T-bar so you can do auto transitions. There's even a small mute button and fade to black button hidden right beside the T-bar. Above the program row we have audio controls, upstream and downstream controls, some transition effects, and then we have menu control. Taking a look here at the multi-view as well, we have a pretty interesting view. We have preview and program, space for 4 sources by default, and then there's this menu or control center at the bottom right. I really like having that clock by default there because I'm using applications often to get my clock into other multi-views, so it's nice to have that by default right there in the multi-view. Pressing down on the menu knob brings up the menu in place of that control panel in the multi-view. And one really interesting thing about this device is that it is designed to be an all-in-one. So the menus actually list all of the menu options that you could find to control the device. Flicking through these menu options, you can see the list is pretty extensive. A few of the ones I really wanted to point out are in this output section here, where you can actually configure both HDMI outputs as well as the webcam output. They can be set to any input, program, preview, clean feed, and even multiview. This is really quite nice because you could connect the USB up to something like Zoom and send the multiview off to a remote contributor on the other end of the call, and that way they can see all the feeds that are coming into your production. Now while you can connect the USB to applications like Zoom or Skype that support a webcam, you can't record to a USB disk on that connection, so it is just for capturing into a computer. One last menu option just to take a quick look at is the color adjustment on the output. This option lets you change the brightness, contrast, and saturation, which actually affects your whole program feed. So if you want to add a little extra punch into your Zoom call, this will work nicely. Let's talk a little about controlling audio. I can select any of the audio sources here, and it'll flash on the device to let me know that I'm editing that one. Then with the volume plus and minus, I can fine-tune the level. I can also see over in the multi-view as it comes up and down. For processing audio, there aren't really any options in the device for adding limiters or compressors or anything like that, so you will want to fix your audio before you bring it into the switcher itself. Connecting the device to your network will allow you to use a PC application that's provided by AVMATRIX. Unfortunately right now it's still only PC, but it does let you control all the settings on the device. And I've also reached out to them and asked them could they document the API so that we can use things like Companion to control this device over the network, but I believe that's still a work in progress. Now the PC application is pretty early days and I believe they're working on a Mac one too, but what I will say is because all the options are in the device itself, then it's not so reliant on a really nice PC or Mac application. The pros and the things I really like about the device are the design itself. It's a really nice, small, simple design with all the buttons that you kind of need on top, and then that multi-view that connects for all the menu options. I really like the two HDMI outputs plus the USB, which can all be configured to whatever I want. So I could send program out all three, I could send multiview out all three. Having that flexibility is really interesting. And the final thing I like is the multi-view with that nice little control center in the bottom corner. I can really see at a glance what time it is, I can see levels, and I can see lots of settings that I don't see on other switchers' multi-views. For the cons on this device, I think that the application for the PC only and no documented API is something I'd really like to see improved. And an important con to notice is that it's not actually a streaming device as such. There's no internal streaming encoder. You do need to connect it up to something like Zoom or a capture card into a completely different piece of software like OBS in order to stream it. So even though it's marketed as a streaming device, I still consider it as a hardware switcher with a USB output. And the final con, of course, and it's a very difficult one, is ecosystem in general. The way that people have used Blackmagic cameras, switchers, and all their devices in their ecosystem seamlessly together really works in Blackmagic's favor. And in the case of AVMATRIX, with this one device, it's really hard to build an ecosystem around that one device. And that just brings me to price, which is a pretty interesting one. It sits right between the HM Mini Pro and the HM Mini Pro ISO. And while I don't think it's comparable to either of those devices directly, I do think it sits nicely in its price range. With the multiple inputs, outputs, and configurability, it makes it a really interesting device in general. I've had this device in my hands for a few months now, and I must say it's actually really growing on me because of all the device's features are built right into it, and those configurable outputs make it really interesting for a lot of use cases. I will say the lack of streaming and the lack of recording mean that you do need to bring more devices with you for a production, but with that configurability and with all the buttons right there in front of you, you could kind of hand this to most anybody, and within a few minutes I think they can get a hang of it really easily. In many cases, I don't think this will be your final switcher, but I think it will be a good one for many community type projects or events like that, where you just want to sit someone down and use it and not have too many features added on top. And the final thing I'll say is if you've bought this or you're thinking about buying it, I would like to hear what you're using it for or what you might use it for in the comments below. So let me know, and I guess I'll see you in the next video. Bye bye.